Hello everyone and welcome to the second podcast of Shaman's Way. I'm here again with Cricket and what are we going to be talking about today, Cricket?
Today we're going to be talking about the various forms of shamanic healing and some of the more popular ones that people have heard of, such as Soul Retrievals, so we'll be discussing that, and a little less known is extraction healing, and then we'll talk very briefly about the lesser known, which is compassionate depossession. And these are in no way all of forms of shamanic healing, but I think these are more so what are common in people seeking types of healing work. I have been doing shamanic healing in Edmonton for almost 20 years, and I have found that there are a number of patterns with respect to what people come for. And then again, when anybody comes for healing that is outside of the, their ballywhack or outside of their frame of reference, then they are not always sure what specifically they do or do not need. And that's kind of where I come in. So the first aspect of shamanic healing that I'd like to talk about a little bit is what are some of the signs and some of the symptoms that a person would have that would maybe indicate to them that they should be able to see a shaman, or that they may be able to see a healer if shamanism isn't their calling. So one of the very first things that has really been on the forefront of my healing for the last 18 months has been anxiety and depression. More and more people are coming through my door for anxiety. And although it is a horrible physical reality and emotional reality and psychological reality, it can at times be very difficult to treat. Shamanism has incredible tools to be able to help with anxiety. What we need to figure out are what are the tools that can work specifically for the individual. The very first step that I take in my assessment and my discussions with my initial patients are what are the symptoms. That's the first aspect of it. The second aspect that I really like to find out is where specifically are the symptoms arising in the body. So some of the more common aspects of anxiety is the inability to breathe, the over excessive thought pattern, even down to waking up in the middle of the night, overcome with severe anxiety and crippling them in many respects. So that is one aspect. The very first thing that we attempt to do when we are working with shamanic healing is called an extraction. So shamans all over the world believe that physical illness is caused by spiritual intrusions, so parasitic spirit beings. So what they tend to do is they tend to merge or latch onto some of the weak spots of our bodies. So our heart, because oftentimes in North America we don't have a lot of ways of protecting ourselves. So we might find this parasitic aspect of spirit living on the heart, oftentimes the lower back. We often find it in the head with headaches. But in my healing practice, what I have found most successful is treating the entire body and clearing the entire body. Now, it looks like a shamanic massage. It looks like a massage. And I have to say, very honestly, that I do employ massage-type techniques. But in shamanism, the extraction healing goes a little bit deeper. What my grandmother would liken it to is that what we are doing is we are removing the memories from the cells on the body. And that makes a lot of sense. So when I'm moving through the shoulders, or when I'm really working on unwinding the belly, in the extraction, when my hands are on a person's stomach and digging through and in the stomach, my hands are looking for roots of different things that have attached to it. Now, earlier, I said that physical illness is often caused by spiritual intrusions or parasitic spirit beings. They obviously infest the weak spots of the subtle body. But I also want to express that The extraction also goes to the root of issues. When we look at the body as though it is the three aspects, so the middle world, the lower world, and the upper world, we have to see that from the waist down is the lower world. So that is the most unconscious aspects of ourself in the root chakra, the sacral chakra, and in the third chakra. That's the lower world. When we are dealing with things that we're more conscious of, it comes from the third chakra, which is just below the sternum, to the throat. And those are things that we generally have an idea what's going on. We generally know when our stomach is upset. We generally know when we have heartburn. We generally know when, we can't take a deep breath and that our shoulders are really closed. So that deals with the middle world. It deals with the trunk of the tree or that aspect. The third part of the body that we treat is also from the throat chakra a bit, and then going all the way up into the crown chakra, and then up the connection to the spirits. So when I do a belly extraction, or when I work on the belly, I'm working in the most unconscious aspects of self. So many people, anxiety is hidden in the roots of our thought patterns. So if I am dealing with someone who has severe anxiety, then my hands are seeking the roots in the first chakra, which is the foundation of who we are. In the second chakra is how secure we feel. Where is our sense of security coming from? Are we secure all by ourselves? And then the third chakra is that power center. So all of that aspects I dig around in the extraction. So I'm not specifically looking for a spiritual intrusion. I'm not looking for a parasitic spirit. What I'm looking for are thought patterns that are buried so incredibly deep we no longer believe that they exist, or we no longer hear them. And in doing so, we bring up a lot of the emotions that people might be feeling. So some people during extractions might have the ability to cry or the desire to cry. Some people will make noises, moans or groans, crying, yelling out. Not necessarily from pain, but although sometimes it does hurt. But more it is that unconscious emotion being released. The other aspect, when we come up between the third chakra and the throat chakra, that can often be, I do find that often be spiritual intrusions, because we are heart-centered beings. We do have really strong language with respect to love one another, love everything. Love is the answer to all things. And in our healing work, we often find that we have put layer over layer over layer over layer to protect our heart, to protect ourselves from love and from being wounded, abandoned, rejected, all of those other things. And those strongly tie into anxiety. The heart races faster, the blood pressure goes up. So we're dealing with the lymphatic system, we're dealing with the liver, we're dealing with the pancreas, we're dealing with the spleen. So in working my hands through all part of those organs, my intention as I'm working in that light trance state, because all healing work is done within that light trance state, it's very important to try to pull those memories or pull those things out of the body and lighten the body. The other part of extraction, and in relationship to the parasitic beings and the spiritual intrusions, if I'm getting at something in the front of the body, often what I will find is that the roots of those things hide. It's almost as though when you go to put your hand into the water and you try to catch a fish, and if you leave your hand just still, the fish might come up to it and you might be able to grab it. But the more you dig, the further down that fish is going to go until you can no longer get it. It is the same with the roots of what we're dealing with. So I may be able to get the branches or a large part of the plant. It's like pulling up the dandelion, only those roots go down 4 or 5 feet. So I roll my patient over and I work on the back. And the back is where the finest and the thickest and the deepest roots will be stored, is in the back. The lower back, the legs, the feet, All of those aspects are worked on with the extraction. What I also include in my extraction healing work is I include healing water, holy water, only I don't get it from the sacred church. I make my own. And the reason I use healing water or shamanic water or moon water is as a energetic replacement for what we remove. If we think of the body like, a polyurethane couch or like a leather couch, and we know when you sit down on the couch and when you stand up, it takes a while for the depression in the cushion to come up to its full state. The physical body is the same. If we think of that subtle body as having weight on it by an intrusion or by something sitting on it, when we take the intrusion out, the subtle body still has that dip in it. One of the things of healing work that my grandmother taught me was that if I include my holy water or my moon water, what it does is it goes to the places where the intrusions have been taken out, the memories have been taken out, and the cords have been taken out, and it fills those places with the energy of holy water. The reason that is done is the adage is the universe hates a void. And in that regard, if we give the holy water, the moon water, then it fills up that space until the subtle body has the ability to catch up with what is happening. Another key aspect to extraction healing is extraction healing can be done on top of the body with clothes on, and you don't have to touch the person. That's the way that I was taught, and it is very powerful within its own right. However, I changed it to include aspects of massage type work because I really believe it's important to engage the conscious mind with an abstract ideology. So you're coming to me for an abstract. In the abstract world, a spiritual intrusion exists. In the abstract world, a parasitic being exists. In the conscious mind, if that conscious mind is engaged through touch, then it is far more likely to accept that something has been removed if we are physically touching it. Then the mind itself can acknowledge, oh, I did feel something moving out of my body, or I did feel this coming out of my muscles. Quite often, during extractions or after extractions, I will hear from my patients how they did feel that energy being pulled from their body, or how they did feel their chest rising up off the massage table as I'm pulling something out and involuntarily releasing that. So there are physical aspects associated with the shamanic healing, the extraction work. So we work in the subtle body by removing things. We work in the coarse body by working our hands very deeply into the body. I also work with scent. So I work with almond oil that has different essential oils mixed in. And I usually use a high-pitched scent so that that person is activated within the third eye or in the crown chakra. And what I mean by a high scent is things which would be like a citrus or sweet birch or some type of essential oil that is going to be hitting the palate in a higher sense or in a quite a high smell, as opposed to if I put black spruce into my massage oil, or if I put earth stewardship essential oil, it's going to have a lower scent to it. It's going to be have a marked effect on the body or a different effect on the body. I use those oils as a way of lightening the body up. After we've done an extraction, the second part that I will do in one sitting is called a soul retrieval. And that is, I think it's an incredibly healing situation. Mine, the very first time I had a soul retrieval was very early on into my shamanic practice. And I was not a teacher by this point. I had only been involved in the drumming circle, I believe, for 3 years. And I was doing a journey to the lower world, and I was met by a spirit I had seen once before, and I refer to her as Mother Earth or Gaia. And I cannot help when I am visited by this spirit to feel absolute joy. So when this spirit walked up to me in the spirit world, I was filled with this ecstasy and this absolute joy, and she was just a beauty to see. And then out from behind her came a little 3-year-old piece of myself, and what was remarkable, and I knew it was me, not that I just recognized it, but I all of a sudden remembered the dress. I remembered the dress that I was wearing, and I remember the big yellow bow that it had, and I didn't like dresses in those days, and I didn't like having to be put on display in a feminine fashion. And so she returned that piece to me, and this is a spontaneous soul retrieval. And I continued the rest of the journey traveling with my 3-year-old self, and my 3-year-old self made me make 3 very distinct promises. One was that I had to learn to laugh, and I really didn't have a great sense of humor at that point in time. The second thing that I had to do was I had to stop getting angry so fast. And the third thing that I had to do is exercise patience. And that night, after the healing circle, or the drumming circle, I went home, and it was for the very first time in my life that I remember feeling lonely. I couldn't remember feeling lonely at any point in time prior to that. And I was able to be tested in my patience and my not to get angry the very next day. I had to drive from Edmonton to Camrose. My children were with my ex-husband and his mother, and I was going to pick them up. Now, my ex-husband, as many ex-spouses can do, can drive you from 0 to furious in less than 4.8 seconds. And, of course, behavior ensued in which my ex perpetuated some behaviors. And I remember sitting back on the chair reflecting, oh my God, I generally would be ready to jump off this chair and strangle him at this point. And that wasn't the case at all. The case was that I was actually able to sit back and to relax in the situation and not get embroiled. Another aspect of patience was I like to drive a standard car, and I shift obviously with my right hand. We live in North America. And I had a ring on in my middle finger, and I would get so impatient in traffic that I would tap my finger on the top of the gear shift to the point where I had flattened it and I couldn't get it off my finger. And that was the level of my impatience. Another example of my impatience, the kid's grandfather asked them one day, what does green light mean? So I said, go. And then he said, well, what does red light mean? And my kid said, stop. And he goes, well, what does a yellow light mean? And my son pipes up, go faster. And I was horrified. I was like, oh my God. So that was an example of where my impatience certainly came through. And it was certainly a task for me not to get as angry as I used to. It wasn't, like one day I had no temper and the next day, one day I had a temper, the next day I didn't. But I can honestly say within 24 hours of receiving the soul retrieval, I changed. And there has never been a return to how I used to be. And when I asked the soul piece, why did you leave? The soul piece showed me being put into a room by my mom because I was sticking my finger in the sugar bowl and eating the sugar, and apparently she was getting ready for some party or something. So she put me in the bedroom, likely their bedroom, and I was too short to reach the door handle. And something as simple as that allowed that little piece of my soul to fracture and to wander off. What I can ascertain is that little piece of myself is the part that took loneliness. So the part that not needing human companionship or not really reaching out for my family's acceptance or reaching out for my mother or my father's love or acceptance. So it did create an interesting shift in my personality. So from that point on, I truly believed in soul retrieval work. My spirits were very kind to me, and they taught me every single step of how to do a soul retrieval. So I had been doing soul retrievals without the proper training, quote unquote, for a number of years, and then thought I should probably get legitimized. And in 2006, I traveled to Albany, New York, to the Omega Center, and I spent 5 days with Sandra Ingerman, who is the North American guru for soul retrieval work. She is a fantastic teacher and one of the most amazing people I've ever seen run a room of 54 students. What I came away from that workshop is learning how to run a 5-day workshop. My spirits had been amazingly thorough with me, and as a result, I did not learn one thing from her class. And that was really, for me, I got the paperwork. I've studied with Sandra Ingerman. This is a great thing to do. But what it really confirmed for me is that for me in shamanic healing, spirit would always be my best teacher. I'm going to go back to extraction healing for a minute. And I've used different tools over the years to engage suffering beings or to engage spiritual intrusions. And so I've learned to use a rattle. I've learned to use my drum. I've learned to whistle. I whistle a lot when I do my work. So whistling to the spirits helps to bring them out. I also will use my hands very forcefully, and what I assume I'm doing from a subtle body perspective is breaking the exoskeleton of that subtle body, because we all have armor. We all have that sense of self, that personal bubble, only we tend to build up armor, psychic armor with respect to that. And in order for me to have an effective healing, it is important for me to break through that armor. Sometimes the drum will do that. Sometimes the rattle will do that. But oftentimes it's my hands pressing firmly on the body and my subtle intuition, my spiritual intuition working at that point in time to know when the crack has occurred. So those are two aspects of healing that I like to do in conjunction with one another. I like to do an extraction before soul retrieval for the very simple reason I want to return that soul piece to a clean house. It's like inviting guests. You know, some people don't mind inviting guests to messy houses. Some people are very OCD about the house. I just want my house to look okay and lived in, and I think that's what extraction does. You know, it makes it look lived in. It makes it look, it makes it more appealing for the soul pieces to come back.
And you mentioned that you ran into your 3-year-old self, so you're obviously doing journey work while the soul retrieval is happening. Was this someone doing a soul retrieval for you, or are you doing one for yourself?
It was spontaneous.
Okay.
I did not know that was what Spirit had in store for me that day.
Yeah.
I had no idea. And in this years that I've been doing soul retrieval work, it is generally within days that an individual will experience a particular healing. Now, I have to put a corollary statement on that. Some people feel things immediately. For some people, it takes days, sometimes weeks to feel change. And for other people, they feel nothing at all. And I cannot tell you, because I don't know, I cannot tell you why those things happen. Why is it one person feels something immediately? Why is there a delayed reaction? And why do some never feel anything at all? I could hypothesize, but I'm not the individuals who have that experience. So I can't put my own thinking on top of it if they haven't discussed it with me.
Right.
But I think soul retrieval it's amazing work. And we have the belief that the soul has the ability to fracture. And it isn't as though a person cannot function without those soul pieces, but often the symptoms I hear are, I don't feel like myself. I feel like something is missing. I feel like I have no drive. I feel like I can't get up. I feel beside myself. So those are all languages that come to me when a person is sitting across from me on the couch explaining to me why they are specifically there. So there are tangible signposts along the way which give a person an indication that something isn't quite right. For extraction healing, people will come to me if they've gone to the physiotherapist, the chiropractor, the massage therapist, taken modern medicine, and none of these things are alleviating what the particular symptoms are. So oftentimes they will come for spiritual healing in order to alleviate the physical symptoms. And oftentimes it does help. It doesn't help, again, in 100% of the cases. Sometimes a person with a frozen shoulder will come for spiritual healing and walk out with a shoulder even worse. Why that is, I do not know. I guess it's a throw of the dice, and some things work and some things don't. And that is very realistic. You can go to a medical doctor, and how many times has a medical doctor been unable to give you a diagnosis, let alone a sustainable or practical treatment for what you're experiencing? So those are two of the, probably the most common aspects of what we're doing. The one that I like to talk about briefly, but fascinates me more than anything in the entire world, is compassionate depossession. And I studied with a beautiful shaman named Betsy Bergstrom. And the reason that I went to take compassionate depossession training was that during the course of the years of doing extraction healing and soul retrieval work, there were things I just couldn't get rid of. There were behaviors I just couldn't help. There were faces that I would see rise up out of the body that would startle me, that I knew were not associated to the person that I was actually working on. So I knew that there was something in my toolbox that was missing. And as a result of that, I looked up this lovely lady. I can't remember how I found out about her. I found out about her, and then I put it on the back burner. And then a year later, I was taken over with this overwhelming need to do something. You know, how many times of us are impulsive, where one minute we're not thinking something, the next minute it's like, oh my God, I have to finish this right now, you know. So for me, that's what it was like with Betsy. Oh my God, I have to take a course right now, you know. And if I don't do something, when the minute I think about it, I like, you know, probably only one other person listening to this procrastinates and doesn't get things done. For the other 99% they're listening to you, bravo for you for doing everything at the same time. However, her course was starting, I think, 6 or 8 weeks after I had signed up. Blew my mind. I was awesomely blown away. She is a fantastic teacher. And I was on the plane, and I was thinking, I must have 396 spirits living in my body, because I lived a horrible childhood on a lot of respects. And I certainly didn't have it easy raising 2 kids by myself. And there are lots of things I thought would leave me weakened with a cracked aura that other beings would get in. And I didn't have 396 by any stretch of the imagination, but I wouldn't have been surprised. So I was really going not only to learn a technique, but also to have my own compassionate depossession. The first thing we learned was that the beings who inhabit our body are called suffering beings. Now, Betsy, she had learned shamanism from her maternal side, which was West Coast Salish Indian, and then her father's side was Irish. And where she came about with compassionate depossession was from her Salish grandmothers. And she also studied Buddhism very strongly. And in Buddhism, they have a practice of compassion. And so where it comes, the term compassionate depossession is that the beings, the suffering beings, which is what they're called in Tibet, or in the Buddhist language, the suffering beings, because they don't mean to be there, they are suffering for the very simple reason they're stuck in this world and they no longer need to be in this world, and they should be wherever their world is. So they are suffering. And if we look at a being as something as suffering, as opposed to a being that is evil or trying to harm us, it changes our opinion and how we work with them. So we had to first realize that suffering being was the term we were going to work with. Then we discussed various scenarios as to how a ghost or how a suffering being would get stuck in the world. I've noticed over the years suicide victims often are suffering beings who reside within people. We have such a negative view with respect to suicide. We have also an overculture with a Christian-based mythology that teaches us if we take our own life, we have no choice but to travel to hell. And that is a very fearful prospect for someone who is already so broken that they believe their only choice is suicide. So it does lead one to believe that if you are so broken, you want to end your life, it isn't a big stretch to think you are so broken you deserve no afterlife. And so suffering beings can come in the form of any type of being that has died, hasn't able to cross over to the light, which is the most common term for it, and therefore wanders around and looks for a food source. And the lighter and the brighter and the funner and the whatever you are, the brighter your light, the more amazingly yummy food source you are for a suffering being. And it isn't that they want to harm you. It isn't that they want to change your behavior, although sometimes they do. Generally, it is a means of just staying alive in whatever form they can stay alive in. So the compassionate depossession was a training whereby we were able to help the person. Let's say, Doug, you and I were working together. What I would do is, we would do some deep breathing. I would ask you where in the body you feel the most tension, and I would ask you a few more questions in relation to that. Then I would ask you to step aside, so you take your own conscious mind and kind of put it to the side. And then I ask for, prior to that, I've already asked for permission from you to use your voice and your body as a way of communicating to the suffering being that is stuck within you. Phenomenal. The first time that I was able to perform a compassionate depossession and the person that I was working with was able to step aside, this other voice came out of this little petite woman, and this voice was this big masculine voice and had gruffer and a different language, not a different accent, but a very different language to the woman that I was speaking with. That it was really fascinating to be able to get this being to see that it came from God, whatever that God is, had a spark of light, and we grow the light during the process. We grow that light inside the suffering being, and as the light grows, then the body, the suffering being, becomes lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter, and we have set up things within the room in order to ascertain that that person or that suffering being is going to ascend or descend, depending on where it comes from, and leave that person. What was fascinating for me when I was the one on the receiving end was, as a kid, I had double vision. So you can assume that, many of us had problems with our eyes. But I still, to this day, can create double vision. And it has become one of my spiritual tools. So if I split my eyes and I look at a person, I can see the physical person, and overlaid lightly with the other eye, I can see the spiritual person. So I just thought it was a funky tool. When the suffering being was removed from me and moving from me, all of a sudden I had a vision of 4 things. And I blinked my eyes thinking, okay, something's in my eye. There's a reason I'm seeing 4 of the same person's face in front of me. And I blinked my eyes and I couldn't change it. And it was the viewpoint of the suffering being who is rising out of my body. And the rising or the compassionate depossession itself doesn't actually take very long. What I noticed within 48 hours was the negative self-talk and the verbal mental track that I had been on for so many years was literally gone. There was silence in my mind. And that happened for me in 2009, I believe was my first training. And I can legitimately say in 2016, 80% of that inner talk never returned. And the other thing that happened for me was I went home, and it was very discombobulating because this being had been in my body pretty well my entire life. I had never felt so lonely in my life. I felt like, how am I going to function? It really did feel as though a huge part of me was gone.
Wow.
It was legitimate, and my whole wardrobe changed. My feet size grew. I went to that Oregon State with a size 6.5 shoe. And when I came back a week to 10 days later, my shoe size was 7. None of my shoes fit. I have no explanation for that whatsoever. So compassionate depossession, we don't talk about in North America. We don't even say the words depossession. And I can honestly tell you, trying to explain to people that I work with or people that don't know a lot about shamanism, as soon as you say the word depossession, what will often happen is the person either didn't hear the word or their eyes glazed completely over. And it is as though we have been trained not to accept that this is part of something that happens within us. Yet if we look at Italy itself does 750,000 exorcisms per year.
Wow.
And in North America, if I do 32 in a year, I'm doing pretty good. So it has been a very fascinating learning experience. I have been called many names while the suffering being is rising. I have seen eye color change. I have had the temperature in the room spike 7 degrees within about 20 minutes. Generally, the room temperature will increase a minimum of 4 degrees when I'm doing a compassion depossession. And the person generally experiences huge shifts in their personality. Now, when I talked about soul retrieval, and some people never feel anything at all, the ratio of people who feel no change at all diminishes greatly. So there is a much larger percent of people who feel a legitimate change after compassion depossession. And I believe it is because they have such an effect on us from a mental perspective, spiritual perspective, as well as a physical perspective. So those are 3 of the main healing techniques that I will use. Compassionate depossession is not something that people generally will walk into my healing space and say, I think I'm possessed. It doesn't happen in North America. But I will gently suggest to them, hey, have you thought about this? And most people are very open-minded and say, well, let's give it a try. And then, of course, you get some people who, bless them with love and compassion, it terrifies them, and they will do, no way are they going to move into that particular reality or that particular ideology. So those are the basic aspects of the shamanic healing. Do you have any other questions?
No, I think you covered that pretty good.
Okay. So the next time that we meet, I think it would be really interesting to discuss, what it is in respect of the 4 directions and the 7 directions. Where do some of those souls go, and where do some of the intrusions that we deal with in extractions? So there are further things to learn with respect to shamanic healing, but there are always further things to learn with respect to the spirits that are intruding upon us, and where do they go and where do they come from.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds good. Anything else you want to touch on this time?
I think that's pretty good. But I really appreciate the time. Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, thank you. And for anyone out there listening, we really appreciate it if you get a chance to give us a review on iTunes. And as always, we will have show notes on shamansway.net with links to some of the various topics Cricket has shared with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.